At my birthday dinner, my dad raised his glass and said, "To the one child who actually made us proud," while looking straight at my sister. My mom added, "Some people peak at birth." Everyone laughed. I just stared at my plate, then quietly said, "Funny. That's not what the DNA test says." My sister froze mid-laugh and my dad dropped his fork. I, 32M, sat at the head of the dinner table, watching my family celebrate what was supposed to be my birthday. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents had gone all out with decorations, my favorite meal, and even invited extended family. Everyone was there except for the person they actually wanted to celebrate. My sister arrived fashionably late, as always, making her grand entrance with designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She worked in marketing for some tech startup, drove a BMW she couldn't really afford, and lived in a downtown loft that cost more than most people's mortgages. Mom immediately started gushing about her latest promotion while Dad poured her the expensive wine he'd been saving. I pushed the mashed potatoes around my plate and tried to remember the last time they'd asked about my job at the engineering firm or acknowledged that I'd just gotten my master's degree. The conversation flowed around me like I was invisible, everyone discussing my sister's adventures, her dating life, her upcoming vacation to Europe. When Dad stood up with his glass raised, I actually thought for a moment he might say something nice about me. It was my birthday, after all. Instead, his eyes found my sister across the table, and he smiled with genuine pride I'd never seen directed at me. He raised his glass higher and announced his toast to the one child who actually made them proud. The words hit me like a physical blow. I watched my sister beam and preen under the attention while everyone murmured their agreement. Mom decided to pile on, adding her comment about how some people peak at birth, which sent the entire table into fits of laughter. I stared down at my plate, feeling something cold settle in my chest. 27 years of being the forgotten child, the disappointment, the one who never quite measured up. I'd graduated summa cum laude, bought my own house at 25, volunteered at the animal shelter every weekend, and sent my parents anniversary cards they never acknowledged. None of it mattered, but I had something they didn't know about. Something I discovered 3 months ago when I'd done a genealogy test for fun, expecting to learn about distant relatives and ethnic backgrounds. Instead, I'd learned that my sister and I didn't share the same biological father. The revelation had sent me down a rabbit hole of research and discovery. I'd always wondered why I looked so different from my sister, why my interests and personality seemed so foreign to my family. The DNA results explained everything. My sister was Dad's biological daughter. I wasn't. At first, I'd planned to keep the information to myself. What good would it do to blow up the family? But sitting there, listening to them mock me on my own birthday, something snapped. I looked up from my plate and spoke quietly, telling them how funny their comments were, considering what the DNA test revealed. The laughter died instantly. My sister froze with her wine glass halfway to her lips, and Dad's fork clattered onto his plate. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the neighbor's dog barking outside, the soft hum of the refrigerator. Everyone was staring at me now, finally giving me the attention I'd craved my entire life. Mom was the first to recover, asking what I meant by that comment with a nervous laugh. I pulled out my phone and showed them the DNA results I'd screenshot weeks ago. I watched the color drain from Dad's face as he read the percentages, the genetic markers, the cold scientific proof that he wasn't my biological father. My sister demanded to know if this was some kind of sick joke. I told them I'd initially thought the same thing, which was why I'd had the test run twice through different companies. Both came back with identical results. Then I'd done some digging into Mom's old photo albums and found some interesting pictures from around the time I was conceived. Dad asked Mom what this meant, his voice barely above a whisper. I watched 32 years of marriage crumble in real time as Mom's carefully constructed lies began to fall apart. She tried to deflect, asking why I would do something so destructive, but I pointed out that I wasn't the one who'd been living a lie for over 3 decades. The extended family started making awkward excuses to leave. Uncle Tom claimed he had an early morning. Aunt Sarah suddenly remembered she'd left something in the oven. Within 15 minutes, the house had cleared out except for the 4 of us. Mom finally admitted that she'd had an affair with her boss at the accounting firm where she used to work. She claimed it had only happened once, that she'd never meant for it to go so far, that she'd tried to forget about it. When she found out she was pregnant, She'd convinced herself the baby was Dad's because the timing could have worked either way. I asked if she'd ever planned to tell the truth. She broke down crying, saying she'd thought about it 1,000 times over the years but couldn't bear to destroy the family. I pointed out that she'd already destroyed it the moment she'd decided to lie. Dad sat in stunned silence, processing the information. Finally, he asked if I'd tried to contact my biological father. I told him I had, and that's when I dropped the second bomb. My biological father was Robert Chun, Mom's former boss, who was now a successful CPA with his own firm. He'd been married with 2 kids when the affair happened, but he divorced a few years later for unrelated reasons. I'd reached out to him 2 weeks ago, and we'd met for coffee. He'd been shocked to learn about me, but welcomed the news. Unlike my legal father, Robert was proud of my achievements and interested in getting to know me. He'd even invited me to have dinner with his current family, who'd all been warm and accepting. My sister accused me of trying to destroy the family out of spite. I reminded her that I wasn't the one who'd spent 32 years lying to everyone. I'd simply revealed a truth that already existed. Dad finally spoke, asking if I was planning to leave the family entirely. I told him I wasn't sure yet. I'd grown up feeling like an outsider, and now I understood why. Meeting Robert had shown me what it felt like to have a parent who was genuinely interested in my life and proud of my accomplishments. Mom begged me not to tell anyone else, worried about what the extended family would think. I reminded her that she should have considered that before humiliating me at my own birthday dinner. I'd spent my entire life being treated like a consolation prize, and I was done pretending it didn't hurt. Update 1. 3 days later, Dad moved into a hotel downtown. Mom had been calling me nonstop, alternating between apologies and anger. She blamed me for destroying her marriage and breaking up the family. I reminded her that she'd done that herself 32 years ago. My sister had been trying to play peacemaker, suggesting we all go to family therapy and work through this together. I told her I wasn't interested in therapy with people who'd spent decades making me feel worthless. Some damage couldn't be undone with a few counseling sessions. Robert invited me to his daughter's soccer game over the weekend. His wife, Patricia, had made a point of introducing me to their friends as Robert's son. It was the first time anyone had ever seemed proud to claim me as family. His kids, Emma and Jake, were curious about their newly discovered half-brother and asked genuine questions about my life and interests. During halftime, Robert apologized for not knowing about me sooner. He said he would have wanted to be part of my life if he'd known I existed. Hearing that from someone who shared my DNA was both healing and heartbreaking. I'd spent 32 years wondering why I never felt like I belonged, and now I understood it was because I'd been trying to fit into the wrong family. Dad called me that evening, asking if we could meet for dinner. We went to a quiet restaurant where he apologized for all the years of favoritism and neglect. He admitted that he'd always felt something was different about me, but had attributed it to personality differences. Learning the truth had made him realize how poorly he'd treated me. I appreciated his apology, but I told him it didn't erase 3 decades of feeling unwanted. He asked if there was any way we could rebuild our relationship, and I said I'd need time to figure out what that might look like. The man who'd raised me had never really been my father in any meaningful way, and his biological connection to my sister had always been obvious in how differently he treated us. Update 2. 2 weeks after the birthday dinner revelation, the family dynamics had completely shifted. Dad had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and breach of trust. Mom had hired a lawyer and was trying to get half of everything, despite being the one who'd cheated and lied for decades. My sister had finally stopped trying to fix things and was now dealing with her own identity crisis. Learning that her perfect family had been built on lies had shaken her confidence in everything she believed about herself. She'd always been the golden child, but now she questioned whether that favoritism had been fair or healthy. Robert had invited me to Thanksgiving dinner with his family, and I'd accepted. For the first time in my life, I was looking forward to a holiday meal instead of dreading the inevitable comparisons and criticisms. Patricia had even asked if I had any dietary restrictions or favorite dishes, showing more consideration than my legal family had ever displayed. Mom had started telling people that I was going through a rebellious phase and making up stories for attention. The irony of her accusing me of lying while she'd built her entire adult life on deception wasn't lost on anyone who knew the real story. Several family friends had reached out to me privately, admitting they'd always noticed the different treatment but hadn't felt comfortable saying anything. Uncle Tom called me one afternoon, apologizing for all the family gatherings where he'd watched me be overlooked and dismissed. He said he'd always liked me better than my sister, but had felt pressured to go along with my parents' obvious favoritism. His validation meant more to me than he probably realized. I'd also started seeing a therapist to process everything that had happened. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that my feelings of inadequacy and constant need to prove myself weren't character flaws, but natural responses to emotional neglect. She encouraged me to set boundaries with my legal family and pursue relationships that actually nourished me. The most surprising development was my relationship with Robert. We'd been meeting for coffee every weekend, and I was getting to know the man who'd contributed half my DNA. He was brilliant, driven, and genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions. We shared similar interests in science and technology, and he'd even offered to introduce me to some contacts at his firm who might be interested in my engineering background. Update 3. 3 months after my birthday disaster, I'd essentially switched families. Dad had moved across town and was dating his secretary, which seemed like poetic justice given how my existence had come to light. Mom was bitter and resentful, blaming everyone except herself for the implosion of her marriage. My sister and I had reached an uneasy truce. She'd finally acknowledged that our parents had treated me unfairly throughout our childhood, and she'd started calling me regularly just to check in. The golden child pedestal she'd lived on her entire life had crumbled, but she seemed healthier and more genuine without it. I'd officially changed my last name to Chun, which had infuriated Mom but felt right to me. Robert had been present when I signed the paperwork, and he'd gotten emotional seeing me take his name. For the first time in my life, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. The engineering contacts Robert had introduced me to had led to a job offer at a prestigious firm that specialized in renewable energy projects. The salary was double what I'd been making, and the work aligned with my values and interests. My legal father had never asked about my career goals, but Robert had spent hours discussing my ambitions and helping me strategize my professional development. Patricia and the kids had fully embraced me as family. Emma had started texting me memes and funny videos, while Jake had asked me to help him with his math homework. Their easy acceptance of me stood in stark contrast to the conditional love I'd received from my legal family. The most satisfying moment came when I ran into my legal parents at the grocery store. Mom had tried to guilt me about missing family events and abandoning them in their time of need. I'd calmly reminded her that she'd abandoned me emotionally 32 years ago, and I was simply returning the favor. Dad had asked if I was happy with my new life, and I told him I was happier than I'd ever been. For the first time, I was part of a family that celebrated my successes instead of minimizing them, that welcomed my presence instead of tolerating it, that saw my worth without me having to constantly prove it. Looking back on that birthday dinner, I realized it had been the best gift I'd ever received. Not because of the celebration or the attention, but because it had finally pushed me to reveal a truth that set me free. Sometimes the most devastating moments in our lives are actually the catalyst for our greatest transformations. I'd spent 32 years trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it, while my real father had been living 20 minutes away, completely unaware of my existence. The DNA test hadn't just revealed genetic information. It had revealed that I deserved better than I'd been accepting my entire life. My revenge hadn't been calculated or planned. It had been spontaneous and honest, born from decades of frustration and disappointment. But in destroying the lies that had shaped my childhood, I'd finally found the family I'd always been searching for.